The Crooked Epic, 1, The Inn of Maniacal Madness, 10, Christopher, the Car, 10b. Despite the vulgar attitudes and toxic instigation by Clarence Hill and his comrade, Thomas Philippe, Christopher Good had used his quick-witted subterfuge and was able to persuade the two airplane craftsmen, professional pilots, and aerodynamics experts to accompany him and his son, Theodore, back to New Hampshire in the same family Ford. The group ended the day staying the night in North Carolina in a motel to the west in Princeville. They arrived at dusk and had no problem finding arrangements in an establishment in the predominantly African-American, newly incorporated township. Historically, it was the first American city formed by formerly enslaved people after the 1860 Civil War in 1885. They stayed on Main Street in a building said to have been built by founder Turner Prince, who had mysteriously vanished the year following construction. Clarence and Thomas were both drunk illegally. They had been celebrating a construction project. They had finished building a plane kept in storage near the Atlantic coast. When they arrived at Mount Mills, they were full of vigor, yet intoxicated and quickly waning in energy. Soon, as the four finished sandwiches at the automat, Christopher started to speak to them more about the project he had proposed over the phone from Weir. His idea was to bring equipment to his home and transport it manually through the tunnel to construct an aeroplane in the field in Hobb. While he had his son's attention, he repeated this plan. He added his imaginary clause of being able to provide the two men with a wealth of money and possibly distinguish them among the highest branches of government as pioneering heroes. Teddy showed his anxiousness and excitement, and the two men found it infectious. Christopher suggested they move their conversation away from the public venue and into the privacy of a motel and asked where they could recommend. Thomas quickly came up with the idea to move west and was becoming excited about the chance to become dignified with accomplishments beyond his current engineering expertise and offered up the idea of Princeville. Clarence knew less about the township but was concurrent with the plan to go with the goods. A door joined the two rooms at the motel in the dividing wall. Christopher left Theodore to sleep after 8 o'clock and went to try to meet with Clarence and Thomas. They were both barely awake, though, and by 8:30 p.m., Clarence sluggishly moved to the bed, having given up on the conversation. Thomas had already caused a small argument with Clarence, dividing their unified rebuttal at the initial reintroduction to the planned procedure by Christopher, when Clarence's slurred speech enticed Thomas to laugh at and ridicule him. Christopher was bearing with the awkwardness of the arrival of iniquitous reprobation of blackguards, but was quickly deconcentrated by a rapping and bombardment on the suite door. Christopher mentioned his son in the other room, excused himself for the night, and stood to his feet, following the noises. With one final plea, as he turned the knob of the room door, he asked if the two men would accompany him on his continued journey back to Hobb. Hobson, North Carolina, is only a few miles north of here, snickered Clarence. Mr. Good slowly opened the adjoining doorway and turned to face Thomas, who was standing up from his chair at the small table and walking to his bed. Thomas turned to Mr. Good and his face turned pale. Christopher mistook the expression for hangover sickness and turned back to his room. Standing over the bed next to his son was a man's shadow. It vanished when Christopher shouted at him. Thomas hobbled over to the doorway, and Clarence sat up in bed as Teddy awakened from slumber and rolled over onto his side. "What's going on?" asked Theodore. "Why are you fighting?" The specter had disappeared. Its presence sent an ominous feeling throughout the group of adults. Teddy went back to sleep, confused, but without much concern except that they seemed more banded together than earlier in the trip.